Thank you for inviting me to speak about libraries and community systems. I'd like to start off with a few beliefs that I hold that show up in libraries and community systems design, which could be seen as controversial. Marketing and advocacy don't matter. Whether or not you or your library are relevant is the wrong concern or consideration. And success of the library service program in terms of usage is mainly determined by the behavior of the library director, and such a model of work and success is unsustainable. Of course, these beliefs are more nuanced than what I'm presenting here, but incorporating these assumptions as the basis for librarianship is helpful in designing service which intentionally puts community residents first. And that's the purpose or aim of this research. Instead of being preoccupied with communicating the value of the library, it is more important to be valuable to the community, as librarian Erica Freudenberger is fond of saying. It's a seemingly small shift in where we put our energy and our focus, and it is at the heart of the questions we seek to answer in this project. Being valuable to the people and places we serve sounds really good, right? Currently, we have no shared definition of valuable. Really, though the tradition of public libraries in the US is over 150 years old, we don't even have a shared definition of public libraries or librarianship, and certainly not one which describes our function in terms of the communities in which we are situated. The quote displayed here comes from the post-World War II book, A Plan for Public Library Service in America, published by the ALA, and then reviewed in the bulletin by Lowell Martin. The first hard truth that confronts an observer of American public libraries is that they have stopped far short of their potential. For lack of clear-cut objectives, many public libraries dissipate rich resources without appreciable effect. In the 80 intervening years since the plan was shared, we do not have clear-cut objectives which relate directly to the objectives of our community residents. And that misalignment leads to earnest and energetic work that might not have any discernible impact on the lives of the people it is created to support. Agreements on definition and function are foundational agreements that, if we arrived at them, could help us as a profession move collectively on the big projects of our time. These include equitable distribution and capability to use resources, individual and collective agency as exercised in civic decision-making, as well as political power and voice, and an environment that is viable and supports that life. Equity is at the top of my big projects list because it is both an aim and a lens through which all other work is designed and implemented. And the environment is at the bottom because it is a foundational element without which even the most strident change is unsustainable. There is no continual community thriving where the actions taken to get there come at the expense of the environment. And in the middle is agency, because that is how we move forward. Without the power to make change or to create the conditions under which change is made, none of the actions actually take place. On the left, in these dotted boxes, we have our open questions, although we have a hypothesized function statement I'll share in a minute. What is the function of a library? Or rather, what is the set of relationships and levers a library exists within and impacts on? How does it do this impacting and being impacted? And finally, the so that. Why does it matter? Why is the library there? And what exactly does a community resident expect it to bring into being? Establishing these agreements, the function of a library and its value to its community, is the specific aim of libraries and community systems. This 3-year research Northern New York Library Network is leading, is funded in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. All of our designs and methods are created in a rich environment of collaboration and partnership, beginning with our state library agency partners in Alaska, New York, South Carolina, and Texas. Our advisory board is an all-star collection of cross-disciplinary scholars and smart folks. Beth Patton, Bill Reed, Jerica Copany, and Lauren Ellen McCann. And by virtue of my status as a student of economics, we have access to my Committee on Studies, David Vandergoes, Jingjing Wang, and Xiaoshui Li, who are not pictured here, but excel in the fields of health, environmental resource, and public goods economics, respectively. I'm the principal investigator, which means I coordinate the different parts of the research and do the lion's share of the design and data work. Our other primary research designer is Ozi Alozim, who is building and facilitating a sweeping series of conversations in our partner states to hear answers to some of our core questions on function and value of a community library. The screenshot you see here comes from the Rural Libraries and Social Wellbeing Interview Quotes page. This is a publicly available, filterable database of interview excerpts from our national study of well-being in rural communities. The dimension categories you see here were defined in the IMLS report, Strengthening Networks and Sparking Change, Museums and Libraries as Community Catalysts. Each of the four have multiple dimensions within them. For instance, lifelong learning and cultural engagement include the dimensions of school effectiveness, social connection, and political voice. Libraries and community systems really began in the summer of 2020 while I, with my colleague Hope Decker, who is now at the Wayland Free Library in the Finger Lakes region of New York, were working with rural library directors from this project who lived around the country on creating tools for practice out of our rural libraries and social well-being research findings. We often use this database directly to sort for elements of interest, like description of the director and mental health. The directors were from the 8 remote rural communities in which we had conducted our field research, interviewing over 200 community residents nationwide. A common pattern across these communities was that when the library was a successful community catalyst or supported individual capability or quality of life improvements, it wasn't what the library did that was consistent. It was how the library director behaved, how the library was situated within community social fabric, how it built service along local pathways. By pathways, I mean ways of doing and being unique to that community that are culturally normal and structurally ingrained and supported in that place. Positive pathways, which we observed, and that cut across variations in language, location, and demographic makeup, were belonging, mutualism, and self-determination. Where people said they were living in their ideal community, interviews included descriptions of all 3 elements in local life. And these library directors had actions and practices that just supported all 3 interwoven pathways to some extent. This top quote is from researcher and librarian Eli Ganay, who is describing how library staff persons created a sense of belonging according to community residents. It is the small and repeated kindnesses that give people a sense of humanity and value. The bottom quote comes from Tanya Taylor from State Line, Mississippi, describing her will and interest in contributing to the future of her town. I have ideas that can reflect the town of State Line and what needs to be done here in order for this to be a productive place. This quote becomes even more illuminating in the context of her community and her full conversation. She is barred from running for elected office because her home isn't within the 2 square mile set of blocks considered to be the city of State Line. Even though the decisions and services designed within the city are what folks for a 10 by 10 mile square have to pay for and live with, only a tiny subset of residents are able to make decisions about those services. What was missing that summer as I worked at mapping out library practice within these interwoven elements of social well-being in action were widespread belief among librarians that supporting well-being across all the dimensions, including, for instance, poverty and political participation, all those things were part of the library's job. Hearing about mission creep from detractors is just become part of my professional persona. But as I listened to rural library directors working through the interview transcripts and research literature, I heard their beliefs quicken and solidify about the purpose of their work and the role of the library in community well-being. What would it take for that belief to spread beyond this core group of practitioner researchers? I realized we needed an understanding of power and gatekeepers within those community systems. As the research team had worked through the interviews, coding them and examining quantitative measures of well-being like voting rights and life expectancy, we also found negative pathway examples like that in State Line. In towns where people felt they had no power to impact the future of their own lives or their town's future, they described a lower quality of life and a lower valuation of the place where they lived. Could understanding how gatekeepers work and how libraries could open gates improve their impact? Where the community systems of belonging, mutual support, and agency or self-determination were more complex because the town was bigger or denser or had more services and institutions vying for a seat at the table and a slice of that funding pie, could we identify important common patterns that cut across variations to demonstrate a model of decision-making and valuation? And if so, could we accurately assign a localizable measure of library value in terms of what matters most to residents, belonging and association, agency and self-determining power and voice, and the place and environment which supports them? We believe that libraries and community systems is designed to effectively deliver on most of those questions. We begin with the statement of function that will shape all the research and set of principles which will impact our findings. The function of a library is to facilitate and produce well-being as lived through the capability to belong, to participate in networks of mutual aid, and to determine one's own future in an environment which supports and grows life. This statement is just a beginning. We know it will shift into something new after we gather more information from librarians and community residents about our core questions. Additionally, we have a couple definitions worth explicitly naming. Economics, for us, and for many people, is the study of how we create and exchange value together in the context of built and living environments. Also, we believe that life has inherent value. So when we're talking about life, it is always positive. Some calculations included in economic models have high discounting of future resources. In other words, the future isn't worth as much compared to the present. And older age is sometimes negatively appreciated because the cost or the financial cost of staying healthy increases over time. We believe in a multi-generational future, and our objectives require equitable outcomes. So our calculations will always favor life, and a life well lived for each individual, as quantified in a well-being adjusted life year. It will always be positive if we can help people live longer and live better. This screenshot is from the project Measure of America in their Interactive Human Development Index mapping tool. You're viewing Congressional District 22 in New York and this organization's breakdown of health, education, and income as the mix which defines quality of life. Different organizations or projects display and interact with this data differently. We are living in a time where gobs and gobs of data are available to people and can be used to improve our understanding of what it's like to live in a particular place. This doesn't necessarily represent what our models will look like or our tools, but I wanted to give you some example to ground your thinking as I describe the products you will have available to you as practitioners by the end of the Libraries and Community Systems project. You'll have a definition of a library, a definition of value, a measurement index of library service in terms of well-being and well-being adjusted life year, a visual model of community systems within which the library is contextualized, a locally customizable model of well-being with a method for library tracking, a value calculator for benefit analysis and program evaluation. The reason I know that our final products might look very, very different than those which have been produced before is that we're pulling from more than just quantitative data and measures. We're also pulling from qualitative data and measures, and we'll be complicating our model with individual expectations and community expectations of library service and community well-being. The New York State Library and Northern New York Library Network will partner to host 4 conversations, one each for urban, suburban, rural, and tribal members and libraries. These will be facilitated by Ozi Alozim, who I mentioned earlier, and she is an accomplished participatory action researcher, and we're excited she'll be leading these conversations. They'll also be happening in the exact same way in South Carolina, Alaska, and Texas. So the themes we pull out of there, which are true across communities, will help us to determine a model that really balances this quantitative index with qualitative values we hear from community residents and library workers and their own definitions of a life well lived. Earlier this year, Igiugig Village's librarian worked with myself and Hope to put into practice research-based tools. My experience with library communities through rural libraries and social well-being has been motivating and has also illuminated myriad gaps in our understandings of local incentives, structures, and how libraries fit into those systems. Because of the complex nature of systems, we know that continual conversation, collaboration, and testing of assumptions and models is key to creating accurate and useful tools. In keeping with our research principles, each phase of work will be done in close consultation with practitioners. Definitions will be built from conversations hosted in each state with hundreds of library workers and community members. Models will be built under advisement from 32 library partners nationwide, and then they will field test those models and calculators, which we make for them. What I hope you'll understand from this is that by the time you receive a product for your use from libraries and community systems, it has been tested, vetted, refined, and tested and vetted again by many dozens of librarians, researchers, and community residents. Of course, this doesn't mean that decades on from now, we won't need to adjust or revise our understandings, given changes in the world or in available information. In fact, that's my hope and dream for all of my work, that we can rip it apart later and make something even better. But that until new information and research comes to light, you will be receiving the resources from some of the best information and thinking available to librarianship right now. If you would like to know more about the project's details, feel free to contact me. My email is at the bottom of this slide. To follow our actions and progress, go to nnyln.org, the Nylon's website. Click on About, the drop down to Research, and then you'll see a little bit more about this project. And you can click the button that says Sign up for updates about this research to receive email notifications as we publish things, or for instance, make public our project as it is on Open Science Framework with all of our initial data. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but we will be this winter. I think we have a couple of minutes available for questions, if anyone would like to venture some. Otherwise, thank you so much for giving me this time.